They moved in quietly, just a family looking for peace. But one neighbor saw difference as danger, and a 911 call turned a peaceful barbecue into a neighborhood reckoning. What she didn't expect, the father at the center of it all, was the new chief of police. What followed wasn't just confrontation, it was transformation. Don't look away, this story demands to be heard. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving behind only dust cardboard boxes and the quiet hum of a neighborhood that didn't yet know it was about to change forever. Willow Creek Lane in Boulder, Colorado was the kind of place that looked like a postcard-trimmed hedges, pastel-colored shutters, American flags fluttering from porches. On the surface, it was everything the Carters had hoped for. Underneath it was everything they didn't yet see. Marcus Carter stood on the front lawn of their new home, a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a weathered oak tree that reached toward the sky like a sentinel. He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging slightly in the cool mountain air. New job, new city, new home. Everything was lining up. And yet, as he looked across the street and caught the faint shift of a curtain, a flicker of unease passed through him. Someone was watching. Someone always was. Inside the house, Camille was unpacking dishes with their daughter Layla, 13, and all sharp edges softened by curiosity, while 8-year-old Jordan made a game of leaping over boxes labeled fragile. Their laughter filled the space like sunlight, and for a moment it felt like home. Camille looked out the window toward Marcus and smiled her kind of smile, the kind that carried 100 private meanings. But Marcus didn't smile back. Not yet. Across the street, hidden behind sheer lace and tradition, Judith Coleman stared with thin-lipped silence. 72, fiercely upright and longtime gatekeeper of Willow Creek Lane, she sipped her morning tea as if it were ammunition. She had lived there since the Nixon administration. She had outlasted neighbors, renovations, floods, and 4 HOA presidents, but nothing unnerved her like the Carters' arrival. Not because they were new, because they didn't fit. The Carters had arrived early, 2 weeks before Marcus was scheduled to begin his new role as Boulder's chief of police. His appointment had been the subject of cautious celebration, decorated veteran family man, a resume so pristine it shimmered. But none of that mattered to Judith. To her, what mattered wasn't what was on paper, but what wasn't. And to her eye, they weren't like the rest of us. A delivery van pulled up in front of the Carters' house. A teenager in a bright orange hoodie jumped out and placed a simple basket on the front steps before darting back into the vehicle and speeding away. Layla, who'd been opening a box of books in the hallway, noticed the movement and went outside to retrieve it. Inside the basket was a bottle of sparkling cider, a loaf of sourdough, and a handwritten card tucked inside a crisp envelope. "Welcome to Willow Creek Lane," it read, in swooping cursive. "We hope your stay is brief." No name, no signature. Layla stared at the note confused. Camille read it next, her lips parting slightly as she processed the words. Marcus took it from her and read it aloud once more, his tone flat and deliberate. They didn't say anything for a long time. Later that evening, as twilight fell and the porch lights of Willow Creek blinked to life one by one, Marcus stood alone outside, arms crossed over his chest. He was no stranger to hostility. He had walked into burning buildings of tension and come out calm. He had de-escalated conflicts in cities far less polished than Boulder. But this it felt different, colder, hidden beneath layers of pleasantries and garden clubs. Camille stepped outside and slipped her hand into his. "You okay?" He nodded, but not all the way. "It's subtle," he said, "but it's starting." She didn't need him to explain. Inside, Layla added the note to her journal. She had a habit of documenting everything, moments, quotes, and justices. One day, she told herself she'd be a journalist or maybe a lawyer, someone who gave voice to silence. She wrote at the top of the page, Day 1. We were invited to leave. Back across the street, Judith Coleman stood in her kitchen, polishing her silverware with slow precision. She had seen the delivery. She had made sure the handwriting was untraceable, the courier paid in cash. She told herself it was her right to protect the neighborhood's character. What she didn't realize was that the seeds she'd just planted were going to bloom into something far bigger than she ever intended. And what none of them knew, not Judith, not the Carters, not the neighbors who had chosen not to wave, that day was that Willow Creek Lane was about to become the epicenter of a reckoning. Not loud at first, but deep and quiet and unstoppable. Because when you try to push out a man like Marcus Carter, you forget one thing. He's not just any father. He's the chief. The morning sun spilled across Willow Creek Lane, touching each lawn like a spotlight waiting for actors to take their place. The Carters had been in their new home for just over a week, and in that short time, the atmosphere had settled into something that could only be described as polite tension. It wasn't in the words exchanged. Those were perfectly civil. It was in the eyes. The way they lingered too long or darted away too quickly. The smiles that stretched across faces but never quite reached the eyes. Camille Carter had grown up in a small town. She knew what sugar-coated suspicion looked like. As she walked with Layla and Jordan toward the local park, waving at neighbors who offered tight-lipped greetings, she felt it again, like a pressure in the chest that couldn't be named, only endured. At the corner, they passed two women talking by a manicured rose bush. The women paused mid-sentence as Camille approached one, offering a wide smile. "Well, hello, Mrs. Carter," said one, her tone too bright. "We were just saying how nice it is to see children playing on the street again." "Thank you," Camille replied evenly. "They've been excited to explore." "Oh, I bet the second woman," said, her eyes scanning Layla's curls, Jordan's scuffed sneakers. "Such energy. Kids bring so much life." Camille smiled back, practiced, and poised. "Yes, they do." When they walked away, she could feel the women's gaze on her back like a weight. She resisted the urge to look over her shoulder. Beside her, Layla looked up. "Why do they talk like that?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like they're saying one thing, but thinking something else." Camille placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Sometimes people wear manners, like masks. That's not about you, that's about them." Meanwhile, Marcus Carter was navigating his own theater of smiles at City Hall. Though his official start as Boulder's new police chief was still a few days away, meetings had already begun. Introductions, handshakes, nods of approval that seemed just a beat too delayed. "Welcome to Boulder, Chief," said Councilman Reiner, shaking Marcus's hand. We're lucky to have you. A real asset to the community. Marcus thanked him, noting the subtle emphasis on community. Others in the room echoed similar sentiments, support wrapped in qualifiers. There was a sense that he had been hired to make a statement, and now everyone was waiting to see how loudly he'd speak. Back on Willow Creek Lane, Camille was hanging wind chimes on the porch when she noticed a boy about Jordan's age standing across the street staring. She smiled and gave a small wave. He hesitated before running back into his house. Moments later, his mother emerged, blonde athletic, clutching a phone and a look of nervous diplomacy. "Hi," she called out. "I'm Megan. That was my son Drew. He's a little shy." Camille stepped off the porch, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you, Megan." "I'm Camille." Megan shook her hand, then glanced over her shoulder as if to make sure no one was watching. "Listen, I just wanted to say welcome. And also, I'm sorry." Camille tilted her head. "Sorry," Megan lowered her voice. "There's been talk about you, your husband, some of the neighbors. They're not exactly subtle." Camille didn't answer right away. Megan continued, "I think what you're doing, just moving in and living your life, is brave. This street isn't used to change, and well, they act like that says more about the change than it does about them." Camille studied her. The apology was imperfect, incomplete, but it was something. "Thank you," she said quietly. That evening, the Carters had dinner on the porch. Camille had made her mother's baked mac and cheese. Jordan was telling a story about school, how his teacher had accidentally called him Jermaine twice before correcting herself. Layla was quieter than usual, pushing peas around her plate. She didn't mean anything, Layla said after a while, but it still felt wrong. Marcus nodded, chewing slowly. Intent and impact are two different things. "I just don't want to be the story everyone tells," Layla muttered. Marcus looked at her carefully. "Sometimes we don't get to choose the story, but we do get to choose how we respond." As twilight deepened, Camille leaned against Marcus's shoulder. Across the street, porch lights flicked on one by one. Judith Coleman's remained dark, but they could feel her behind the curtain. "She's not done," Camille whispered. "No," Marcus agreed. "But neither are we." And with that, they sat under the gathering stars, a family wrapped in quiet defiance, knowing full well that the battle they were walking into wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered through the leaves, rode on polite hellos, and hid behind trimmed hedges. But they had lived through louder storms, and this time they were building their roots right where the side eyes tried to stare them down. The idea came to Camille late one evening while folding laundry, the scent of lavender softener still clinging to the fabric. "What if we host a barbecue?" she said aloud, more to the quiet room than anyone in particular. But Marcus, who had just stepped out of the shower, heard her. "A barbecue?" he asked, drying his face with a towel. She nodded. "To meet everyone properly. To remind them we're not a story or a symbol. We're just people. Neighbors." Marcus studied her for a moment. "You sure you want to do that?" "No," she admitted. "But I think we need to." Within days, plans were underway. Layla made handmade invitations with pastel cardstock and glitter glue, signing each one with a bright smiley face and a hopeful heart. Jordan helped his father test the grill out back, learning to stack charcoal and time the searing just right. Camille spent her evenings drafting a menu. Nothing extravagant, just comforting dishes that filled the air with familiarity. Ribs and sweet molasses, glazed veggie skewers, coleslaw, fresh lemonade. She even baked peach cobbler using a recipe passed down through her grandmother's hands. Marcus made a point to deliver each invitation personally, walking door to door in full view of his neighbors. The responses were mixed. Some smiled genuinely, offering to bring side dishes. Others nodded with forced politeness, murmuring vague excuses about scheduling conflicts. And then there was Judith Coleman. She opened her door only an inch. A barbecue, she repeated slowly, her face unreadable. Yes, just something casual, Marcus said, smiling. We'd love for you to come by. I'll think about it, she replied, then shut the door. On the morning of the barbecue, Camille woke before the sun. She moved through the kitchen, with purpose chopping onions, seasoning meat, stirring batter. It wasn't just a meal, it was a statement, a peaceful one, but a statement nonetheless. By noon, the backyard was transformed. A long table covered in a checkered cloth was laden with food. String lights danced above in the wind. Folding chairs were arranged in circles to invite conversation. A small speaker played Marvin Gaye in the background, its volume soft enough to encourage connection. The first guests arrived, a couple from 3 houses down with 2 young kids. Then a middle-aged man who worked in construction. Slowly, others trickled in. Some brought dishes, others brought curiosity. Conversations started. Children ran across the yard, chasing bubbles and kicking soccer balls. Laughter rose, tentative but real. Camille stood by the grill with Marcus watching it all unfold. It's working, she whispered. For now, Marcus said, flipping a burger. Let's hope it stays that way. It was an hour into the gathering when Judith Coleman walked past her window. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just stared for a long moment, and then disappeared back into her house. Angela, a neighbor from the next block, approached Camille a few minutes later. She won't come, you know, she said gently. She's not built for joy, that's not hers. Camille nodded, but she can't unsee it. As the afternoon wore on, the yard filled with warmth and the scent of charred barbecue. Layla performed a short poem she'd written for a school project, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger with every word. When she finished, the yard erupted in applause. I didn't know your daughter was so talented, someone remarked to Marcus. There's a lot people don't know about us, he replied, smiling. It was just after sunset, when the first sign of trouble arrived, a pair of police cruisers pulling up to the curb, their lights flashing silently. The crowd grew still. Camille's hand froze around a serving spoon. Jordan dropped the ball he'd been tossing. Marcus stepped forward, instinctively walking toward the officers. He kept his posture calm, his expression unreadable. Evening, he said. Can I help you? One officer stepped forward, glancing around the yard, clearly assessing. Noise complaint, he said. Caller mentioned a disturbance. Marcus nodded. As you can see, it's just a barbecue. Community event. The officer looked again at the diverse group, children with sticky fingers from popsicles, elderly neighbors leaning in close to hear one another, music still soft in the background. Then his eyes settled on Marcus's face. Recognition dawned. You're Chief Carter. He said the words, catching slightly in his throat. Marcus gave a slow nod. Yes, and these are our neighbors. The officer turned to his partner. We're good here. As they walked back to their car, one neighbor asked quietly, who would call the cops on a barbecue? Camille didn't need to answer. Her eyes drifted across the street to the darkened window of Judith Coleman's house. The curtain swayed. That night, after the guests had gone, and the yard was still, Camille sat with Marcus on the porch. Layla and Jordan were asleep inside. The lanterns above them flickered gently. She really did it, Camille said softly. She called them. Marcus nodded, but it didn't end the way she expected. No, Camille said. It didn't. And in that moment, they understood something powerful. They had been seen, tested, and watched, but they had not been broken. The barbecue had started as a gesture of goodwill, but it had become a line in the sand, and they had held it with grace. What Judith hadn't counted on was that the badge Marcus wore didn't just signify authority. It signified protection of dignity, of decency, of the right to gather, laugh, and live. On Willow Creek Lane, something had shifted. Not everyone would name it. Not everyone would embrace it. But it had happened, and now the neighborhood could never claim not to know better. In the quiet that followed, Camille whispered, "Next year, we're doing ribs and jerk chicken." Marcus laughed the sound low and steady. "I'll start marinating early." The next morning, the smell of smoke still lingered faintly on Marcus Carter's shirt, and the backyard bore the marks of celebration, empty cups on tables, folding chairs left askew, the soft deflation of the bounce house, now half collapsed in the grass. Yet the house itself was quiet, unusually so. Camille stood at the sink, washing dishes slowly, her mind replaying the image of flashing lights from the night before. It hadn't escalated. The officers had recognized Marcus, but the implication still hung in the air like the trailing scent of barbecue. If he hadn't been the police chief, what might that encounter have become? Outside, the neighborhood carried on as if nothing had happened. A jogger passed by, earbuds in. A child cycled past on a banana yellow bike. Birds chirped as if they hadn't missed a beat. But something had changed, not just in Marcus and Camille's home, but in the very atmosphere of Willow Creek Lane. It was noon when the doorbell rang. Marcus opened the door to find Councilman Brent Mayfield standing there, his sleeves rolled up and a folder tucked under one arm. "I heard about what happened," he said without preamble. "May I come in?" Marcus nodded and stepped aside. In the living room, Brent placed the folder on the coffee table and sat. He looked at Marcus and Camille in turn. "I want to apologize," he said. "This neighborhood, this city should have welcomed you without question, and yet a family barbecue ended with a police response. We're not looking for apologies," Camille said, though her tone was not harsh. "We're looking for acknowledgement." "You're right," Brent replied. "And maybe more than that." He slid the folder forward. Inside were printed emails, transcripts of previous complaints, and a file that made Camille's eyebrows rise, a copy of the 911 call. The voice was unmistakable, cool, composed, and false. "I don't know these people," Judith Coleman had said. "They're loud. There's a lot of traffic. I'm worried about safety. I just think someone should check it out." Safety. Camille murmured the word bitter on her tongue. "We were serving ribs and lemonade." She didn't mention Marcus by name, Brent said. "But I think we both know it was targeted." She wanted us embarrassed. Marcus said, calm but resolute. She wanted the neighborhood to question who we are. "But that's not what happened," Brent said. "In fact, since last night, I've gotten 5 emails from neighbors who were at the barbecue, supportive ones, and I'm not the only one." "The chief of community relations got a call this morning from the mayor," Camille echoed. Brent nodded. "Wants to meet you both. Publicly. She's calling it a teaching moment. Personally, I call it long overdue." Later that afternoon, Marcus stepped outside to clear the lawn. As he coiled up a string of party lights, he noticed Judith Coleman standing across the street. She wasn't pretending to be on a walk this time. She wasn't hiding behind her curtain. She was simply watching. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But after a few seconds, she began walking toward him. Camille noticed and came to the porch, quiet observant. Judith reached the sidewalk in front of their home and paused. Her posture wasn't proud today. Her arms hung stiffly at her sides. "I suppose you know it was me," she said. Neither Camille nor Marcus confirmed it. Judith continued, "I made the call. I thought something might happen." Why Camille asked. The word was a whisper, a thread between pain and restraint. Judith's mouth tightened. "Because it's always been quiet here, orderly." And then, "You thought we were the disruption," Marcus said, "not the welcome." Judith looked down at the sidewalk. "You're the police chief," she said. You should understand wanting things to stay safe." Marcus took a step forward, not in threat, but in gravity. Being safe doesn't mean being unchanged. It doesn't mean being unwelcoming. And it certainly doesn't mean weaponizing fear to protect an illusion of comfort. You didn't mean to be caught," Camille said softly, "but you did mean what you did." Judith swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "I lost my husband in this neighborhood. We built a life here. I've watched it change." "And change feels like loss," Camille said gently. "But that doesn't make it wrong." Judith looked up, her expression crumbling. "I didn't know your daughter was the one who read that poem. I heard it from my porch. I cried. I didn't want to. But I did." There was a long pause. "I don't expect forgiveness," Judith said, "but I didn't come here to hide." Camille stepped down from the porch. "Then don't hide anymore," she said. "Start showing up. For everyone, not just yourself." Judith gave a small nod. It was barely perceptible. But then she did something. Neither Marcus nor Camille expected. She turned and walked toward their house's front steps, where Layla's hand-drawn invitation to the barbecue still fluttered on the railing untouched. She picked it up, looked at it, then tucked it into her coat and walked away. That night, Marcus sat in his office reviewing paperwork when Jordan entered with his tablet. "Dad," he said, "can I show you something?" On the screen was a photo from the barbecue. It had been taken by a neighbor and posted to the community page. The caption read, "A beautiful day with good people. Glad to know our new neighbors." In the photo, Marcus was flipping burgers. Camille was laughing with a group of women, and Layla stood beside a group of other kids mid-laugh. It was ordinary, familiar, and as Marcus realized, revolutionary in its own quiet way. "Can I print it?" Jordan asked. "Sure," Marcus replied. He watched his son leave, and a thought struck him. They hadn't set out to change the neighborhood. They'd only wanted to be part of it. But in telling the truth, on the front lawn, in the backyard, and through every silent stare they'd endured, they had done just that. Change didn't always come in courtrooms or council chambers. Sometimes it arrived on folding chairs and paper plates in small acts of courage that reverberated like echoes. Judith had spoken her truth today, not a perfect one, not even a kind one, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, Marcus knew, were the most powerful part of any story. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again over Willow Creek Lane, but it would shine on a different street than it had the day before. Autumn settled softly over Willow Creek Lane, draping the neighborhood in amber light and crisp air that rustled the changing leaves. For the Carter family, it had been nearly 2 months since the barbecue, since the call, since the quiet war of perception and truth that played out across lawns and glances. But something subtle had shifted in the community, not a revolution, not a parade, but a kind of awakening. Camille Carter stood at the edge of a plot of land next to the community park. What had once been an unused stretch of weed-riddled grass was now being tilled into rows prepared for something new. The soil was rich and dark soft underfoot. She knelt down, hands in gardening gloves, placing the first of many wooden stakes to mark off garden beds. Behind her, Marcus helped guide a pair of teens from the high school ROTC team as they unloaded bags of mulch from the back of a pickup. Layla and Jordan were already sketching signs for the Willow Creek Community Garden, their markers smudging bright green and yellow across cardboard. The idea had started with Camille. It came to her one morning while sipping coffee on the porch, watching Judith Coleman pause by the edge of their yard, not to glare, but to wave. A small wave, but a wave nonetheless. In that moment, Camille had realized something. If fear could spread in silence, then so could hope. She told Marcus later that day, "We need to give people something to tend to together, something that grows." The project gained traction quickly. Marcus brought it to the town council, and Brent Mayfield, who had continued checking in weekly, pushed it through. Local businesses donated tools, seeds, and lumber. A retired horticulturist down the block offered to teach classes for kids. Even Judith showed up quietly, asking if she could contribute a few hydrangeas from the backyard that no longer get enough sun. No one turned her away. By the third weekend of work, neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now worked side by side. It wasn't always easy. Conversations were cautious at first. But over soil and shovels, the barriers softened. People who had stood on opposite ends of judgment now asked each other for watering tips, exchanged recipes, shared grief. One widower confessed to Camille, "While planting basil, I haven't had anyone to talk to since my wife passed. But this helps." The community garden grew not just with vegetables, but with stories. Each plot was assigned to a family or individual, but the space itself remained open. Children were encouraged to wander, to ask questions, to get dirt under their fingernails. On Saturdays, Camille hosted a garden circle where neighbors sat on benches to share ideas, laughter, even silence. Marcus, for his part, used the garden as a tool for restorative connection. Once a month, he led coffee and conversation, an open talk between residents and local officers. No uniforms, no podiums, just people. They spoke about safety, yes, but also about perception identity and what it meant to belong. It was not always comfortable, but it was always honest. Judith attended the third meeting. She didn't speak at first, sitting alone at the edge of the circle, hands folded in her lap. But when a young black mother described being followed in a store, Judith finally raised her voice, not to defend herself, but to listen. "I used to think I was protecting something," she said, "but I see now I was guarding fear. And fear doesn't deserve a fence around it." Later that week, Camille found a note tucked inside a potted lavender plant left at her door. "Thank you for your grace. I'm still learning, but I want to keep learning. Judith." The transformation wasn't dramatic, and it didn't touch everyone. Some neighbors still held tight to old discomforts, but the difference now was in the open space for accountability. When someone asked why the Carters needed a garden to make friends, another neighbor would step in and say, It's not about making friends. It's about making space. Layla's class wrote essays about community for a school project. Her teacher shared excerpts with the district. Jordan created a digital photo series of the garden's growth capturing both plants and people and submitted it to a local youth art exhibit. One of the judges, an artist who had faced his own battles with belonging, messaged Marcus after the show. Your son sees what most adults miss. He's not just documenting change, he's recording truth. On the first day of harvest, the community held a potluck in the garden. Dishes made with homegrown ingredients lined the tables: tomato basil tarts, grilled zucchini berry cobbler from the bushes planted at the rear of the lot. Children ran between rows, laughter echoing under string lights strung between wooden posts. An elder neighbor played soft jazz on a saxophone. Judith brought sweet tea. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with amber and lilac, Marcus stood beside Camille and looked out over the scene. It didn't erase the pain that had brought them to this point, but it honored it, transformed it. Do you think it'll last? Camille asked. He wrapped an arm around her. Nothing grows unless we tend to it. But yes, I think it will. They watched as Layla and Jordan offered Judith a slice of peach pie. She accepted with a hesitant smile. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. Because now the roots were deeper. And where roots take hold, something stronger always follows. This was no longer just a story about a 911 call, or a confrontation, or even a barbecue. It was a story about what happens after the quiet, radical work of rebuilding, of planting hope where fear had once lived, of watching it grow side by side beneath the open sky. Marcus Carter and his family didn't move to Willow Creek Lane to make a statement. They moved for the same reasons many families do: for opportunity, for community, for a fresh start. As the new police chief, Marcus carried a sense of duty and a lifetime of service. But even he couldn't have predicted that a backyard barbecue filled with laughter and the scent of grilled ribs would ignite a quiet firestorm of prejudice. What unfolded wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a mirror held up to a neighborhood and to the nation. From polite smiles that mask suspicion to the piercing judgment of a 911 call, the Carters faced more than passive exclusion. They encountered a legacy of fear, one that still lingers in suburban corners, too polite to name it. But instead of retreating, Marcus and Camille chose to confront it, not with anger, but with clarity. Not with accusation, but with action. Through a shared garden, open dialogue, and simple acts of presence, the Carters invited their community not only to see them, but to see itself more honestly. Neighbors who had been hesitant began to show up. Even Judith Coleman, whose fear nearly shattered a moment of joy, found herself drawn into the light of change. What began as a confrontation ended in collaboration. And what started as a call to the police became a call to accountability. The story of the Carter family reminds us that the greatest changes don't always come from court rulings or viral headlines. Sometimes they come from backyard conversations, garden beds, and the quiet decision to stay even when others might wish you'd leave. Marcus didn't win by virtue of his badge. He won by embodying the kind of leadership that listens before it judges and builds rather than burns. So, what can we take away from this? We learn that community is not defined by geography, but by grace. That neighborliness means more than waving from a porch. It means facing our discomforts and choosing connection over control. It means asking ourselves, who do we still see as outsiders, and why the Carter's story is a blueprint for anyone who has ever felt unwelcome in a place they've worked hard to call home. It's a reminder that change begins when one person chooses to stand their ground, not in defiance, but in dignity. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, question, or even just feel a little more hopeful, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. Use it as a spark to look at your own community and ask, what can we grow here? And if you believe we need more stories like this stories that challenge, uplift, and inspire, please support this channel. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and be part of this growing community. Your voice matters, and together we can keep planting the seeds of something better.